Welcome, everybody. We are very excited to kick off this panel. We're going to give it about 10 seconds to let everybody join in, and then we're going to kick off. All right, well, let's get started here. Again, thank you everybody for joining. Really excited about today's panel. My name is Jamieson. I work for the Global Sports Venture Studio. We're very excited to be partnered with League Apps to discuss a really important topic and something that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts around youth sports and kind of the future of the athlete and fan as it relates to youth sports. First, a little bit about myself and the Global Sports Venture Studio. We are an innovation group that works with major sports organizations and organizations in the sports ecosystem to help drive innovation, really actionable innovation in the sports world. We work with a lot of major partners. And so we're very excited to work with League Apps as one of those partners. So we kind of span and sit in the middle between major organizations and startups. And yeah, so we are excited to be here today with League Apps and our esteemed panelists who I'm going to let introduce themselves. And so Christian, why don't I start with you on LAFC?
Great, thanks Fielding. Hello, good morning everybody. My name is Christian Lau, CTO for the Los Angeles Football Club and Bank of California Stadium here in Los Angeles. And I'm really excited to join everybody today.
Great, Josh?
Hey everybody, thanks Fielding. Josh Dreith, Manager of Youth and Street Hockey with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
And Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Regnier, and I am the Executive Director for Community Strategy with the Spurs and CEO of Spurs Give, the official nonprofit of the Spurs, San Antonio FC, and our Austin Spurs.
Great, thanks everybody. So just some quick housekeeping items before we get into the panel. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can use our QA functionality. It's at the bottom of your screen. Just press that button and we'll try to get to your questions. I also want to just remind everybody that the next League Apps event is with Next Up University, and that will be December 2nd through 4th, and they are going to drop a link in the chat for you guys to check that out. We also, just a quick save the date for our third and final partnership event with RGA and League Apps will be on January 20th, and that's going to actually focus on the future of technology in youth sports. And then finally, there will be a poll at the end of the event. We hope that you all will bear with us and take that poll. Okay, so let's jump in. So we are here to talk about the future of athletes and fandom as it relates to youth sports. And I just want to kind of set up the current situation that we find ourselves in with youth sports. And so we have seen, unfortunately, a steady decline essentially since 2008 in young athletes participating in youth sports. So kind of kids from age 6 to 12, we've seen almost a 7 to 8% decrease in participation. We also find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, which has unfortunately sped up that lack of participation because of essentially lack of access. Kids don't have places to play, schools getting canceled, sports are getting canceled. And so we really start to see that, unfortunately, I think organizations were trying to make big strides in the sports space. We're facing a major setback with COVID. And then finally, I think one thing to just also call out when we think of youth sports, I always like to remember this, is that youth sports should be fun. And I think that we've gotten a little bit away from that. And essentially we're having kids quit by age 11. And the number one reason that they're citing is because it's not fun anymore. And so just to kind of frame for our audience of where we are right now in youth sports, I think we're at a major turning point where major organizations are starting to take a look at what they can do to help youth sports. And so that's why I'm really excited to have our three panelists here today, all whose organizations are approaching that problem in different ways, and obviously from different sports, which is really exciting. And then, you know, one thing that we think about at the Global Sports Venture Studio is this idea that the relationship between athletes and fans and organizations, frankly, are not one-to-one relationships. We actually really like to think of them as cyclical, right? So the idea is that when kids become athletes, those athletes eventually, the ones that don't continue to go on and play professional sports, and even the ones that do, right? Those athletes then become fans. And those fans then, want to participate and be a part of a fandom, which makes leagues and teams want to create exciting fan experiences for those fans. Those fans then engage in those fan engagement practices. And then ultimately, hopefully, that money from that engagement is flowing back into the leagues. And what the leagues are doing with that is then starting the cycle all over again, reinvesting that money into youth sports. And that's what these three organizations are doing today. So with that, I want to dive in, and this is going to be an interactive panel. So again, please feel free to drop your questions in. But I want to start with the first question. And Jennifer, I'm going to go to you on this. At what age do you think that somebody can become a fan?
That's a good question. And there's so much conversation around that. You have your folks who say they have those diehard kids that are just born Spurs fans. But for me, I really think about before age 6, that it's really about the positive experiences that they have with sports and how that influences their later decisions to be a fan. And so my belief is that children under that age of 6 to 8 years old typically use sports to be social with other individuals, not to be competitive, but they're there to socialize and have fun. And if they have a really great experience with a great coach, and then you couple that with a family that attends games and they make memorable moments that they can then remember in the ages of 8 and older, then they start to be that fan. They have those experiences, that loyalty to the brand and to the game.
That's great. And let's talk a little bit about the idea around access, right? So Jennifer, you hit on, if you start engaging with these fans, they start to build that kind of loyalty. But in reality, a lot of these kids don't have the opportunity to be engaging in sports. And Josh, I'm going to go to you on this. You work in a traditionally very hot area. You work in the sport of ice hockey. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing to help solve that problem of access.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a ton of ice rinks in the Tampa area, so we obviously face that challenge every day in growing the sport. But our method of growing the sport, like we talked about before, we utilize street hockey and ball hockey pretty heavily, right? So when it comes to access, over the last 2 years, we're building 10 outdoor rinks in communities, right? So we're going to those communities, we're building those rinks, and we're building those opportunities for kids to be introduced to the sport and continue to play. So for us, when it comes to access, it's about going to them, going to their community center, building the rinks, being authentic, and showing that we care, and there are opportunities to be introduced to the sport in any way, in any form that it takes. It doesn't just have to be ice hockey.
Yeah. That's great. And speaking of kind of communities and the community angle, Christian, I know that LAFC has worked very hard, not only in the youth sports space, but also actually building up the whole community around you. Can you touch on a little bit of your efforts there?
Yeah, absolutely. So before LAFC even kicked a ball, at Bank of California Stadium back in 2018, we really focused our efforts on Los Angeles, right? Everything was about the community. And so with the LAFC Foundation and some of our partners, we actually started to go out into the community, not unlike the Lightning. We also focused heavily on building infrastructure. And so you think about futsal courts, access to, proper fields to play soccer. And we did a lot of that work, and we continue to do that today because we want to make those types of things accessible to the community. And so I think we've done a pretty good job of it, but there's a lot of work to do there. And so, we're not going to let our foot off the gas.
That's great. That's great to hear. Jennifer, you guys have done some pretty incredible things in terms of actually, getting building actually places for these kids to go play basketball. Would love for you to share a little bit about what you guys have done for your communities and how you're really bringing physically that sport into their community.
I would love to. So I started in this position a little over 2 years ago. And on the first year, I took about 9 months of that first year to really go out in the community and listen and learn. And I was in a middle school, and I was talking to a group of young gentlemen that were probably ages, I don't know, 11 to 14. And they were talking about basketball. We brought a PE takeover. It's where we come in with our coyote and we take over their gym and we do their gym class for the day. And I was asking the boys if they played sports, and they said, no, our parents can't afford that. And so I asked them if they would be interested, or the parents would be interested in playing Spurs Youth Basketball League, which is a free league that Spurs Give offers to over 10,000 kids. And the answer was, my mom's not going to bring me to that. She can't. So that was really eye-opening for me. And so with that, and having conversations with one of our players, Lamarcus Aldridge, he shared a story with me that when he was a child growing up, he was starting to get in a little bit of trouble here and there, like kids do. And somebody came into his neighborhood and built a court. And it changed his life. He saw like there was something more, there was something to do, there was this team, and there were people to meet, and he could go out and do something positive. And from that, we partnered with the city of San Antonio to do a $1 million commitment to renovate and bring courts to every district across San Antonio. So we wanted to bring those courts with free, with the ability to have free programs with the Parks Department for families to take part in recreation together around mental health and physical health. We have court games going on out there. We also have a culinary health education coming out, and they're doing cooking demonstrations with families on those courts and things like that. So yeah, we are looking at how do you break those transportation barriers and have access for all.
That's great. So I think, one thing that is super important for kind of youth as we think about youth sports is really honestly the actual kid themselves, right? Like how much it truly affects children in the long run, and just some statistics around that I was reading as we were researching for this panel, and that we're very close with that Aspen Institute in terms of watching what they're doing with Project Play. They're reporting things out like kids that are participating in sports have higher self-esteem, they have less depression, they're performing better at work as they get older, their test scores are up, there's less smoking, drug use, pregnancy. I mean, all really, really positive things that aren't just positive things that are happening on the playing field, right? These are truly building life skills for these people. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the efforts actually that's kind of going on outside of necessary your traditional sports route. And Jennifer, you just hit on a couple of those. Josh, I read today, I believe, that the NHL, for example, is launching a virtual science fair, which is really interesting because you wouldn't ever kind of associate necessarily hockey with science. And so they're going to have this virtual science fair for kids in middle school. Any other comments around kind of how your team specifically, or what the NHL is doing in terms of kind of building these kids up outside of the traditional sport?
Yeah, on the science fair, it's going to be a great opportunity for kids. So for 7 years now, we've been working with the NHL has been working with a company called EverFi. It's an ed tech company, so it teaches the game of hockey through science, technology, engineering, and math. So it's a great program. Those of you that are on the call in the NHL obviously have heard about it. It's just a way to connect to these students. Obviously, in a time like this, being able to go to their computer screen and teach them the game of hockey while being educational and teaching them about STEM is a win-win. Besides that, it comes down to more than just the sport. So if we're doing a program in a community, let's say at an outdoor rink, we don't have to play hockey every week. You don't have to play basketball every week. There's times where we send the staff out and they're playing video games, or they're chatting about school or things like that. So it doesn't always have to be hitting home on the sport. It's about caring about the youth as a whole. So finding ways in your programming to take a step back from the sport and not always you're not always playing ball hockey, you're playing basketball, and just caring for the youth and the individual that you're dealing with at that time, I think is very important.
Yeah, that can completely agree. I think it's one thing that I honestly wasn't as focused on in terms of what all of your organizations are doing, not just specifically in your sport, but actually to round out this this child really, not only as an athlete, but also as a contributor to their community, which is fantastic. Christian, I learned about a program that you guys had that you're one of our partners. I wasn't aware of it during this time around falconry. And so would love for you to talk a little bit about that program and how you guys are using that to kind of help teach kids in the LA community.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of what we do at LAFC in the community, it doesn't really have, to do with football, right? And so you think about some of the educational programs that we've got. We have a youth leadership program, where we teach kids, we actually pay them a stipend to be leaders in their schools and to mentor other kids in school, on their education, on soccer, etc. We do a lot of financial literacy and teaching people how to be smart with money and, those types of things. So a lot of education. And then one of the things that we do have as a ritual before all of our matches, if you've been to the stadium, is we have a falcon flight. So we actually have like an entire Falcon Air Force. We have a couple of Hawks as well that protect the Falcons. It's actually a whole thing. But what we decided to do, when you think about conservation, animal welfare, and understanding, falconry in general, we decided to get that into the schools here in Los Angeles. And so we actually have our falcons travel around to schools in LA, where we educate the kids about things specific to falconry, about the environment, about conservation, and all of these things that would not normally be top of mind, for kids. And so we've actually had a lot of success with that. People really lean into it, and so we're going to continue to do that as well. Any and everywhere that we see a need, whether it's something cool like falconry, or we understand that there are people that need to do more around nutrition, for example. We're gonna approach it. We're gonna lean in hard on it because we're really, our ethos is for Los Angeles, and that's not just a gimmick. I mean, everything that we're doing is for the community. You think about LAFC as a brand specifically. We've only been around for just a handful of years now. But if you think about like the multi-generational dynamics of society, and you've got parents that are fans of our club, or they have a European club or Liga MX, and then their kids become fans, right? You see little babies in Dodger gear, for example. They kind of grow up with it, and so that's where we want to be. And it's not just to sell tickets and have people be a fan of LAFC. It's to actually make our communities better.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that ethos. And I think actually all of you, frankly, share that, which is really wonderful. Just to talk a little bit, Josh, you brought this up a little bit, but even Christian, as you kind of said, we're there for what kids are looking at and what the community is looking at. So let's switch gears to, I think, one of the largest things that kids are looking at right now, which is gaming and esports, and how that is really starting to affect more traditional sports. So while we're seeing a decrease in kids playing what we would identify as more traditional field sports, we're seeing an increase in kids spending a lot more time behind screens and playing video games, some of those video games being sports games. And I think that we saw a really big upswing of that during, obviously, the coronavirus. And we saw really traditional sports starting to blur those lines between the difference between kind of esports and traditional, and really starting to meet in the middle. So, back in March, when this whole thing came up, NBA was trying to figure out what they were going to do. ESPN ends up airing on broadcast NBA 2K players only tournament, right? Where they were actually, like, you were watching, like so many kids do on platforms like Twitch now, on a national broadcast, you're watching NBA players play NBA 2K. we saw the same thing. MLS has been really invested in this space, right? They have an eMLS Cup. They truly believe that leaning into the kids that are playing in FIFA can really help them, grow fandom for on the more traditional sports side. And then finally today or yesterday, I believe, the NFL announced, first the Pro Bowl was canceled, and then they decided to bring it back. And now they're actually doing the Pro Bowl with players, the NFL players actually playing Madden. And so we're seeing this kind of convergence of esports, traditional sports, and the idea of trying to, I think, maybe look at the kids that are playing those esports and seeing if it could translate into an actual sports fan. Josh, I'm going to go with you to start on this because I cited some examples of some of the other leagues here and just would love to know how you guys are thinking about esports from, again, your team perspective, your area, your community, as well as the league.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously a big opportunity in regards to esports with the NHL. The way that our team looks at it, obviously it's a content play, right? Too, like you're watching the players play, but there's an opportunity there for non-NHL playing games, right? So if you're going out to a game that's not a non-sports game, for example, you're reaching out to a market that you wouldn't have reached out to before. If a kid is playing NHL, there's a very good chance he's going to be a Lightning fan already. So there's opportunity there and streaming on the content side and playing tournaments on non-NHL based games to reach a different set of fan base. So there's that piece of it where there's an opportunity. On the league level, we've done our NHL Chell Challenge or Lightning Chell Challenge the last couple of weeks. So the league is pushing down in regards to, or passing down, I should say, in regards to tournament play and NHL competition, which we have been a part of over the last 2 years. And then on the youth level, we've been looking at this recently and are hoping to dive in at some point this year and finding a way to reach the youth in esports and gaming, I should say. We've looked at creating a youth esports camp, a series of camps where an individual is learning the different skills of NHL, and then throwing in the physical element of it as well. So looping in learning how to stick handle or learning how to train in hockey up on your feet, but then also jumping on your computer screen and learning the rules and games of NHL. And the opportunity there is gaming is teaching the rules too, right? It's teaching the rules of the game for the youth. So there's plenty of opportunities. The league level tournament based, we look at it as an opportunity to reach out to a different demographic of fan base. And then on the youth side, we're looking into camps and things like that. So
it's a great point. I hadn't thought about actually leveraging games like that to actually teach the game in terms of learning those rules. That's an interesting way of looking at it. Christian, how are you guys at LAFC? I think you have personally a very robust tech background, and the MLS is doing some things and some interesting things. Was kind of a leader actually in this space. How are you guys looking at leveraging esports for the gaming community?
Yeah, so we've actually kind of jumped in head first. So we're on eMLS. We have Remy Martin, one of the best players, in the league. So we're really excited about that. And it's interesting. There was a lot of conversation and a lot of interest in having clubs around the world actually do friendlies with us. So we've actually done some of that, as well as some other MLS clubs. But beyond that, we're really focused on how do you converge the traditional, sports app. So the LAFC app, for example, how do you basically integrate esports and gaming broadly, going into sports betting and some other things into that experience. And so we're working on some stuff now that'll be really interesting. But we know that gaming, and it's not just going to be, FIFA. Right. There's a ton of game opportunity out there. And when you start looking at some of the leagues that are coming about, luckily we share ownership with some very interesting companies like, Team Liquid, for example. And so understanding their approach to this, I think we're going to have some really cool stuff to share in the next, 12, 24 months. I'm being very vague, but yeah. So I think we've cracked what this could end up being. And so think about virtual worlds for a minute. think about the gamification of fandom. When you look at something like Green Park Sports, if you guys have seen that, it's going to start, hitting pretty soon. And the ability to basically have, like, just say Inter Miami fans competing with LAFC fans on a match day, right, for points and prizes and things like that. Insert game here, right? There's just so many different opportunities. And so we're looking at those types of things.
All right, folks. Well, you've heard it here first. LAFC might have cracked the code. And so, Christian, thanks. We'll be looking forward to some of those announcements the next year or two. Jennifer, just want to give you the opportunity to talk through a little bit about how you all are looking at, esports gaming in your community. You guys have a very robust set of services, for lack of a better term, that you're providing your community. And are esports and gaming a part of that?
Yeah, I think, from the NBA perspective, you hit on it. They're in a joint venture with 2K Interactive, and they just completed the 3rd season. They're going into their 4th season in May. The numbers and viewership has been up since the pandemic, with it being on broadcast. And I think there's 23 or 24 of NBA teams are doing esports right now and are a part of that community. Right now, our franchise is not taking part in it. We have hosted some gaming tournaments and coding tournaments. And then from a community perspective, Spurs Give has been focused on offering coding for free to any of the children that want to sign up for it. So it's not necessarily San Antonio. We have people from Mexico. We've had people from Africa that have joined in, and we've been doing virtual coding. So they are able to come on and have instructions. If they want the instruction piece, they're able to post at Spurs Give and get to win different prizes from the Spurs if they complete their coding. So it's just our way to gain that interest in that demographic of kids that are interested in gaming and coding, while our franchise is not yet focused on that aspect.
Right. That's great. And you bring up a great point about kind of coding and frankly, the idea around kind of technology and making sure that our kids are having the best access to tech tools. I mean, we are hosting this event with League Apps, a technology platform that is trying to solve the problem of access, one of the major problems in access of youth sports, which is the idea that some of these organizations can't get organized, right? And so League Apps has, created a platform to help them do that. And so I think technology is really a big key to unlock some of these experiences, right? So we talked a lot about the physical barriers, right? In terms of getting kids out, we got to build courts, we got to get balls in their hands, we got to get sticks. We haven't necessarily talked about, I think, where technology can come into play and actually help some of these efforts. Christian, I'm going to go to you kind of on this question, because you mentioned Green Sports is a new technology platform that's kind of up and coming that could help bridge this esports gap. Are there any other tech platforms or technologies in general that you think are really going to be able to help create that bridge between youth sports or youth fans or youth in general and your organization?
We hope so. There's a couple of things that I've seen over the summer when we were participating in accelerators, and I think that a good example. So we have our youth academy; it does really well, but there is a cost to participate, and so what we want to do over time is bridge that, and we really want people to be able. And so I think through partners, for example, we really want kids to be able to participate. So, providing gear, for example, the places to play, that's going to be a key element for us. When you think about some of the platforms that do exist, when it ties back into engagement, right, with those kids, we want to play in that space. And whether that's going to be an educational experience, a gaming experience, something specific to football, is it shooting dragons, right? We don't know. Like, we're working through that now. It's hard to land the plane on that, because there are a lot of things at play. There are platforms out there today, around, lead generation, for example, databases of kids and, getting, with their parents' permission, obviously, some level of engagement. There's really nothing out there that I've seen that has that entire ecosystem soup to nuts. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's definitely something that we're trying to solve for.
No, it doesn't. And hopefully we have some people on this call who could potentially help solve that challenge.
Well, yeah, reach out. Let's figure it out.
Jennifer, I know you guys are approaching the digital divide and doing some interesting things in that, right? And so we've seen that, and especially during COVID times, this has certainly been exacerbated, that idea of digital divide, that, you know, people of means have access to computers, have access to internet, can play these games, can buy these gaming consoles, can kind of really participate in all the advantages that technology can offer. But those who are disenfranchised don't always have that access. So again, we're kind of looking at that access problem. Now it's not from a physical, but now it's from a technical and technological perspective. I'd love to just for you to share with the audience a little bit about how you guys are approaching the digital divide problem.
Sure. And I think, you know, backing up to that, we had a rebrand in January with a new mission and name, going from Silver and Black Give back to Spurs Give. And that happened end of January. And then all of a sudden, March 12th, you know, we were all sent home from the AT&T Center to work from home. And all of our kids were, you know, brought home to finish out the school year. And in San Antonio and across the United States, there is such a huge issue with digital divide. We looked at doing a fundraiser in the middle of the pandemic in May and raised $1 million to go back to fill gaps in our community. We knew that we had to get involved. We knew that it was the right thing to do, and it was not a matter of if, but like how fast can we raise $1 million when people are being asked to give to all these essential needs in the community. So we partnered with our city and our county, and digital divide was one of those gap areas that wasn't receiving enough funding immediately from the federal or state funding. And we were able to provide Wi-Fi and hotspots by having fleets of vans be sent out to people's homes who didn't have transportation to pick them up. All they had to do was let us know, and we had vans. We partnered with Bibliotech. It's one of the first digital libraries in the United States. They have 2 locations now, and we had 12 Spurs Give vans that were taking these hotspots out to these families. We also partnered with San Antonio ISD. It's one of our underserved areas in the community, and they needed about $100,000 to complete all of their students to have access to Wi-Fi, and we were able to provide that as well. We're also continuing that effort and bringing other funders to the table. So one thing that's really cool about a sports platform is that you're able to amplify issues and causes and bring funders together. And so we are really working on convening and bringing these funders together to work on legacy projects that would continue the digital divide work for long-term solutions. Those were the Band-Aid solutions that we needed in the moment. They were important to get school done last year and to get started this year, but there is some real work that needs to be done with infrastructure and working with providers and our state and federal legislation around digital divide efforts. And so we're working in that space right now and hoping to continue to close gaps.
That's great. I think, you know, to shift gears a little bit, one other area that we all, you know, talked about before on this call, I know actually all organizations that you guys are work for also believe in this, is, you know, another area we just have to close the gap is diversity. And obviously, you know, I was excited to see, you know, equal representation of women and men on this panel, but we obviously need to continue to do work in making sure that we're seeing and hearing diverse voices. And a lot of that starts not only on building the athlete side, but then also as those athletes become sports fans and the hiring and working in sports organizations. So I think it's something that sports has truly leaned into this year in a major way. But one area that I want to take a little bit of a shift on talking specifically about, you know, what those efforts are being done in terms of creating equal representation for a second, and actually go to something, Josh, that you guys are doing, which it was when we kind of talked in our pre-talk, was super interesting to me as I thought about the idea of kind of actually diversity in sport and the idea of not just staying in your lane, which is ice hockey. And you guys are obviously very good at it. I'm Stanley Cup champ, so you know what you're doing there. But one thing I thought was interesting is how you guys actually leaned into, and you spoke a little bit about this before, but what was happening in your community, which is the idea that it's hot, and street ball and street hockey was something that you felt like you guys could start with and then potentially grow those kids. So would love for you to talk about a little bit of how you guys honestly even thought of that, kind of came to that idea of let's start to lean into, again, less about our traditional avenue and more into leaning into what you were seeing in your community.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to chat about that. It's definitely down my lane and a passion of mine. Over 5 years ago, we would visit schools and we would get them all excited, and when we would leave, there would be nothing to keep them playing the game. So the way that we see it is if we were able to put a stick and a ball in kids' hands to introduce them to the sport, they were going to get hooked on it. We also see that if they're playing street hockey and ball hockey, they're still a Lightning fan. They don't have to play ice hockey to be a Lightning fan. So there's different forms of the sport. So what we saw is we give a stick and a ball to a kid, they're going to get obsessed with the game of hockey. So to date, we've visited over the last 5 years, visited 850 schools and donated almost 200,000 hockey sticks now, about 180,000 hockey sticks. So we have handed out a lot of hockey sticks, and we've seen the kids and the families be a part of the ecosystem of sport, right? So if we hand them a stick and a ball, where does it go from there? Well, they may play ball hockey, they may go to the rinks, but then they may want to learn to skate after they've played. On the diversity end of it, a large portion, I think it's almost 70% of our schools are Title I schools in the state of Florida, so free or reduced lunch. So we've focused on going into those schools with the street and ball program, and then tying back to access, what we talked about before, being deliberate in regards to where we're placing those rinks. Yeah, there's some outdoor rinks in more affluent areas, but we have outdoor rinks in large Hispanic population, large Black population. So we have reached out to those communities, built those rinks, and used those rinks as a hub. I loved what Jennifer said in regards to doing cooking classes at the rinks. Like that's amazing, right? Like it doesn't have to all be about hockey. So utilizing those rinks to bring the local community in and create authentic touch points is what you want to see. Like putting out a tweet or putting out a post about Hispanic Heritage Month is one thing, but being in the grassroots, building a rink and having weekly or even bi-weekly touch points with those kids and those individuals in the community is really important in regards to growing diversity at the participation level, and then obviously leading into a more diverse fan base in the end.
That's great. Christian, I want to go to you on this as well. You guys, your stadium, still on hockey. Your stadium is in a very diverse community in LA. So, how are you guys looking at making sure that LAFC is a team for everybody?
Yeah, it's interesting. We are in a diverse community, being in Los Angeles. The stadium itself is actually in a historically Black neighborhood. And when you think about diversity, I think we've nailed that. And we didn't do anything. It just happened, right? If you come to Bank of California Stadium, you will see, and we have the demographic data, that it's a very diverse mix of people, men and women, young families. An extraordinary number of women with their daughters love to come to matches, for example. So I think that part's good to go. So what we're focused on, and it is diversity, but it's got more to do with inclusion. So in South Los Angeles, for example, there are a lot of challenges going back, decades, as we all know. And so you think about food deserts and lack of infrastructure and those types of things. And so we're focused on that. We want to help bring in, new businesses, whether that's retail, restaurants, the ability for food delivery into these neighborhoods. One of the things we did last year, pre-pandemic, is Bird scooters. If you guys know Bird, the electric scooters, we brought them in to the stadium and we did a community event, and we actually had them teaching people from the neighborhood how to ride an electric scooter, and we gave everybody a helmet, right, for safety. It's little things like that that we want to focus on. During the pandemic, we've done food drives. We've actually, given away, I forget the metric, but it's tons and tons of healthy, fresh vegetables, fruits, and other things that, are not readily accessible in certain neighborhoods in South LA. And so we're going to continue to do that. And we really want to ramp that up, because at the end of the day, we want South LA to be very successful. They've hosted us, they've been very generous to us. And we want to make sure that we're giving back to the community, in a proper way, and at scale.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it continues to amaze me, what all of you are doing for your community. One thing Jennifer, I know that we had talked previously a little bit about the Pro Sports Assembly. I wanted to give you a minute to talk about some of the efforts that are happening there.
Yeah, so, part of what we're talking about today, right, diversity and inclusion, we all have responsibility to support the advancement of underrepresented demographics in sports. And so Pro Sports Assembly, if anyone's interested, the prosportsassembly.org, and anyone that's in the sports industry at all can be a part of it. It's a 501c3, it's member-based. And it is creating and fostering a healthy and equitable workforce in teams, leagues, and unions. So they're looking at developing cultural and gender intelligence throughout our industry. A lot of other corporations and industries already have something like that. And really, they just wanted to focus on advancing diversity and inclusion throughout professional sports. So exactly what we're talking about today. If you're interested, please take a look at prosportsassembly.org, or give me an email after this, and I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And please do reach out to Jennifer if you have any questions. I want to switch gears a little bit into something that we know that all kids love, or especially, or so at least I've read, around, which is social media and kind of the emergence of these new platforms like TikTok that have been incredibly popular. Again, though, taking kids maybe away from the traditional playing outside and now back behind a screen. But what we've seen is a lot of organizations leaning into these kind of social media measures to kind of, again, engage with their fans and meet fans where they are, right? That's something we talk a lot about at the Global Sports Venture Studio, not to necessarily try to force different fans into what you think fandom looks like, but also to actually meet them where those individuals are. And I think one trend that we're seeing is this idea that kids specifically are starting to follow actual individual athletes versus teams, right? So they are really gravitating towards kind of those big name players versus becoming necessarily a team fan. And so as we talk about kind of what the future of this kind of youth athlete and fan looks like for you all, would be curious to get some thoughts on how you guys look at kind of your return on investment into some of those platforms to reach some of those younger fans. Christian, I'll go to you first with this one in terms of how are you looking at kind of the power of social media and what that can specifically do to grow kind of that younger fan base?
Yeah, it's interesting. So social media for us is kind of a lifeline. Frankly, we don't really do traditional marketing at LAFC. If anybody on this call follows us, you'll know that we've never actually put any money into marketing. It's all been grassroots, social media. The only thing we have done is we did buy a billboard across the street from the stadium where there's a cutout of downtown LA. And we only did that because our crosstown rivals were likely going to buy that billboard. And of course, we did not want that. But beyond that, social media has been key for us. A slight flex is LAFC was actually the first pro team to be on TikTok. We got invited back in the day when they were working on their beta and getting everything set up. So we embraced that pretty hard. But you're right. You take a look at our players, somebody like Carlos Vela, Diego Rossi, for example, and their following is massive. And so we do want to expand that opportunity. We're starting to look at platforms that would allow fans to have experiences, digital experiences with players, right? Not unlike what we're doing right now. It would be basically the idea, and I won't mention any names, but there's one down in Australia that we like, where you would basically have a small get together with Carlos Vela, for example, one-to-one conversational. We're also looking at things around using virtual reality, augmented reality to do, kind of like player photos, those types of things, which a lot of teams have done, but we're talking like in real time, not, a virtual image of somebody, but, basically pairing the two. So we're trying to figure out how we can engage fans with players, not only in venue, but out of venue and around the world. So oddly enough, LAFC has a huge fan base in Australia. There's actually a huge supporter group from Australia. Some of them actually come all the way to LA to watch some of our matches. And so, you look at that, how do we engage that fan base, right? How does LAFC become a known brand in Africa like Liverpool? Liverpool's the biggest club in Africa. How did that happen? So that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to focus on. And when you have high caliber stars like Carlos Vela, people typically want to lean into that. They're already a fan of his from his days, at Real Sociedad or the Mexican national team. And so we're working through it.
That's really interesting about the Australia kind of connection. That's a long way to go for a game, but I love the commitment. That's great. Josh, I want to go to you. You guys certainly, again, being Stanley Cup champs, have some pretty major players on your team, which I think attract a lot of attention, and I'm sure they do in your community. And you're also kind of on the ground, going to a lot of these schools, really talking with the kids, seeing what are you seeing in terms of how they're engaging with these social media platforms, and how do you think it eventually can kind of help you guys grow your fan base?
Yeah, looking at it from the organization perspective, using an example recently, Alex Killorn not being one of our he's a very good player, not one of our like elite five, I would say, but he did Doc Talk. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but definitely look it up before the playoffs. And what it was is there's an island on the other across the way. There's a harbor island from the arena, and there's a river that goes through Tampa. It's pretty nice down here. Growing up in Toronto, I'm loving it down here, especially the weather right now. But anyways, the Killorn drove his jet ski around to different players, and all the players live on the island. So he drove his jet ski live on Instagram and did dock talk with different players. So he'd pull up to Stamkos' house. Stammer would be sitting on his dock, and they'd have a conversation there, right? So it's just coming up with creative ways to empower your athletes, right? Like Killorn wants to be an influencer, and he loves that, right? So just listening to him and what he wants to do and letting him run with it is very important, right? Not trying to continually, okay, come sit here and talk about something, or what do you want to do, and how can we help you? Even if it is jumping on a jet ski and driving around Tampa. So finding ways to engage the athletes on stuff that they enjoy is, it crosses over between social media. I think the other big thing is in the virtual and social world is athlete engagement is much easier, right? Like if you go to Hedman, for example, he loves playing FIFA, right? So having him play FIFA with a kid and streaming it, he's all about it. He's right in. And he can also do it from his house. So in regards to the virtual and social world, these athletes, and we're looking at doing this, is making sure they have the proper technology at their house, but jumping on a call for an hour or playing a video game because you have the proper streaming is so much easier than having to travel, let's say 3-4 hours to go to a community. So there's a lot of opportunity. You started the conversation with athlete engagement, and I think there's so much opportunity in the virtual and social world to engage these athletes and interests that they have.
Completely agree. It sounds like you all have really leaned into that. And I know, Jennifer, your organization has also leaned in a little bit of a different way, moving a little bit away from the social media conversation, which you're obviously welcome to touch on. But you guys have really leaned into this idea of like, what do athletes enjoy? How do our athletes want to give back to the community? You've already mentioned one example, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the decision around, and again, we all work for businesses at the end of the day, right? The decision that around the idea of like, let's go to our athletes, let's see what they want to do, and then let's help them do it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the being genuine piece, right? So I think someone else just touched on the fact that you could pull a player to an event and say, hey, I need you to go and engage with these kids, and this is why, and they have no emotional attachment to it. You can tell. Kids can tell, people can tell. And I think it's really important to find that match. So right now, for example, Keldon Johnson, his sister has diabetes, and he came to us and said, what can I do in that space that fits within your mission? Is there anything we could do together? And that's where we go and look and say, where can we have the greatest impact with what Keldon is passionate about to get out there and really share that message? And it came back to, working with diabetes and working with chef, culinary health education, and how do we tell the story? And so we're still in the process of putting that story together, but that's one that just came through just recently. Over the summer with the pandemic, Patty Mills came to us and he wanted to do Give Mama Coffee. And what that was about is he was wanting to get people to come out, socially distant, and purchase coffee from local coffee shops. But then a portion of proceeds went back to the battered women and children's shelter, which he and his wife were very passionate about. And so Patty and his wife went to the shelter, made this commitment and this donation to them, spent time there. And it just built up a wonderful story. And so it also brings me back to thinking about recently, I saw that Amex, right, has a 2020 Jersey Assurance campaign. I don't know if you all are familiar or have seen it, but basically jerseys are trade resistant if you buy it with your Amex card. So if your favorite player, because even our partners know that the younger fan is about the player, not about the team as much anymore. And so you have a year of that player gets traded, they will refund you or send you a jersey with their new team. So when you think about that, and then you think about the community aspect and putting these players out there, helping them build their brand, but in turn, they're giving back to the community, and we're teaching them that it's bigger than basketball. And we have a younger team right now. And one thing when I first met Pop was, it's not about basketball. It's bigger than basketball. What are we doing to help others? How do we use the sport as a vehicle to help others? And that sits with me, and why he's the greatest coach of all time. And I can say that.
You can certainly say that. So, I think we've talked a lot today about the importance of investing in our children, right? In our kids, and in youth sports, and everything that it can do, not only for these individuals, but also the community, and as well as, how you guys are looking at not only these individual children, but you're looking at it as a community as a whole. I just wanted to kind of end the discussion today a little bit about just coming back a little bit to reality almost of the idea of like, we're all businesses, right? We all work for business, and ultimately, the main number one goal there is to make money. And I want to be realistic about that. And so what I think is important for our audience to hear is, what does success look like for you all? As you're going out there, what are metrics? What are things that are driving you in your individual job? And what are you reporting back, to your organization of why it is important? How are you showing that story and connecting those dots between making these investments into the youth sport, that it is eventually going to kind of come back full circle into your organization? Christian, I will start with you on that question.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're right. The reality is we are a business. We do need to make money, but for us, it's a focus, but it's not the focus. Sure, we got to keep the lights on. We've got to operate the club and pay salaries and all these things. But for what we're trying to do, it's this kind of like a clinical term, but we're really just trying to build the ecosystem for the future to sustain our organization, just like the Spurs or the Lightning, would as well. And what I mean by that is, you invest your time, your resources into engaging with fans, prospective fans, babies, whoever it is, right? And you start to be true to what you're trying to do, and then you can deliver on the promise for Los Angeles, right? So everything we're doing is genuine, right? If we're trying to do things organically, there's nothing gimmicky about it. And at the end of the day, we just want to be inclusive. We want people to love LAFC. Sure, we want them to buy tickets, come to a match and get like a Momofuku chicken sandwich, whatever it might be. But ultimately, we've got to do the work to build that out. And like I mentioned earlier, multi-generational dynamics play into that, right? I'm just kind of like I'm at LAFC at a point in time, and I'm thinking 40 years from now. And so, when you think about sustainability and really building out an organization, not unlike like the Dodgers, for example, they've been around for a long time. They're in a good headspace. We want to do something very similar to that and do a lot of good in the community at the same time.
Right, about investing into the future. I think being authentic is so critical. Obviously something very critical that the next generation, specifically Gen Z, I think we all have seen the data, that's kind of one of their number one things that they look at when choosing to follow a team or a brand or organization. Josh, was just, curious on your take on this. How are you kind of reporting back to your organization? What are things that they're looking at from you?
Again, obviously, right now, finding ways to drive revenue is extremely important. But looking back over the last 5 years, yes, there's participation numbers that we drive, like the 200,000 kids that we've reached out to and things like that. But the truth is that, and I think I don't want to speak for a lot of sports organizations, but I think there is a struggle and a battle to tie like youth engagement to the direct revenue, right? Like that's a challenge that a lot of organizations have. Now, how can we chip away at that, right? Like, are we surveying our families to understand how in an 8-week program or a 2-month or 8-week program or a year program, how are we driving fandom across that? So surveying them at the beginning of the program, surveying them at the end of the program, seeing how we've drove that program or drove that fandom. Are they able to identify with our captain now after they completed a youth program, right? Things like that to try to gauge fandom. So there's the fandom questions that we ask a lot in our registration. So if we're setting up a registration platform, we'll gauge their fandom there. We'll gauge it at the end. But then there's also the revenue side of it, the financial side of it. When we're surveying these families, have they went to a Lightning game since they started this program? Has the program encouraged them to purchase merchandise? So we're trying to chip away at that and create a data warehouse where we can to tell a complete story. And I think just starting small, even asking questions that when you're registering on the League app site to when you're following up with them after a program's completed and trying to understand that story, it's a start. But trying to find one place where you can house all that data and tell that story is something that we're continuing to try to figure out.
Absolutely. Data is so critical. And again, another plug, because our third event in January will be around kind of how technology is affecting youth sports. And I think data will be a major part of that conversation. Jennifer, would love for you to bring us home here. You mentioned this earlier, but we are in a time where revenues are down across all sports organizations. And you guys were successfully able to raise money during this time and actually give back to the community with that money. And so just would love to know, how the Spurs are looking at kind of almost the ROI on building and continuing to invest into the community.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost with the Spurs, it's about our values-based leadership. R.C. Buford came in to be leader of the business side of the organization after years on the basketball side, and has really taken the time to push for innovation for one Spurs sports and entertainment, meaning basketball and the business side, to come together to look through the lens of community in all that we do. So if we are giving back to the community, there should be that piece of storytelling, as Josh spoke about, and that platform that we're using, that we have within our organization to share out and have that cause marketing that's going out to our fans and our future fans, and people being engaged in that, seeing that, look what the Spurs are doing in the community. They just put $1 million into parks. They're coming together and bringing funders to the table to attack things. They're being good partners and good stewards. And I think when people see that, Gen Z, millennials, that's what they're looking for, is that feel good. When I purchase something, I know I'm doing it with an organization that has a great mission, and that is genuinely giving back to the community in an authentic, genuine way. And we always live by our 3 principles of, integrity, caring, and then success. And I say success last because if you have the first 2, then you should have the success of financial stability at the end of the day, if you can follow those first 2.
That is fantastic. I think that is an amazing note to end on. I just want to take a second to thank all of our panelists. Really appreciate virtual applause. Very much appreciate your time and your feedback here. And thank you all for joining this great conversation. And we will hopefully see you in January for our 3rd and final event with League Apps. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Fielding.
Thank you.